Midway is the punk rock, you know, they're like the Ramones or the Sex Pistols of the video game industry. The guys who are like, oh, this is how you think that we should do it. These are the rules that you think we should obey. Well, what if we go the other way?
What was the culture of Midway in the 90s? And my take on it was aggressive.
It's pushing the boundaries of maybe good taste.
I don't think that there's a single gamer that exists that never played a Midway game.
They were the only company in a lot of ways that could make a fantastic sports game that anyone could pick up and play.
It looked so real to me that I was like, Boof, you just killed me.
I remember thinking to myself, wow, I'm working with gods.
They made great games, and at one point, we led the world.
I call it like the Big Bang of the video game universe. I mean, we went from blank screens to very rudimentary games like Pong to all of a sudden, you know, we've got Space Invaders, Pac-Man, Donkey Kong. You know, we came out with Defender.
Within months of appearing on the market in 1981, his game Defender shot to the top and stayed there. For Williams, the company that owned it, his idea was worth $100 million.
Well, it's sort of the ultimate fantasy where you are the only force left between evil and good.
You go into a place, I mean, there'd be 8 defenders. People would be standing in line, you know, 3 or 4 or 5 deep. It was a golden era. But, you know, then we got to 84. All this great stuff got kind of buried under just like this stinking pile of like shitty clones and, you know, 6-week Atari 2600 ports.
Anything was selling at the time as far as the home market was concerned. And people started just shoving garbage out the door. And at some point in time, the customer got fed up with the thing.
This year's hit is next year's firewood. And
it's that tough, this business.
It is. I mean, 3 years from now, you'll ask somebody what Defender was, and they'll go, I don't know.
The consumer got disenchanted with what was going on with, I think, the consumer product. It affected how things were going on in the arcades and how the game's earnings went down, and we did backtrack.
The whole video game crash was just kind of like, wow, man, this is game over. And went back to school for a couple of years in California, and but you know, I just couldn't get the video game thing out of my head. And I'm like, so I was like, yeah, man, we got to do a new game, you know, get the band back together. So back to working at what was known as Williams.
I just remember him, before he started doing anything, coming to New York when I was still in New York, talking about the idea of doing another video game.
Eugene came in and wasn't really prepared, but he knew in his mind what he wanted to do. And he wrote down on a big piece of paper, NARC. He held up the piece of paper and it says NARC. And they said, what's NARC?
Guy, you know, protecting the world from the scourge of drugs and pushers and drug dealers. I felt like video games was always in some kind of fantasy world. You know, it was always like, oh, you know, we're men in tights, we're, you know, running around with swords and casting spells on people and spears and stuff. I'm like, why can't a video game be about something real? We wanted to make an impression to the world that Williams was back.
My job was in field service, like I answered the 800 number. And I would badger the programmers at night to understand what they did. So then I would go to college and I would try to find classes that like somehow matched what these guys knew, because I wanted to know what that was. My goal was to program a game, and there's no way you could learn. You just had to do it on your own.
You think about the casualness of this era. You're kind of like putting together a team, and like, man, I need like a programmer for this game. And then you talk to a couple people, and here's some kid, just got out of college. I think he's still trying to finish the last couple courses.
I'm going to be in. I did visualize that as the opportunity, the video game opportunity of a lifetime for me. I mean, if Eugene's starting video and I'm not on the ground floor, I mean, if I wait 6 months to go do summer school or whatever, I'm going to miss something.
Jack Hager was really the lead artist and then the kind of the art director.
Jack has a great history where he went on to be one of the founders of the Amiga.
What more can you say?
When we started, I guess there wasn't a clear sense of what we were going to do. It was more, let's develop the hardware and the software.
I always thought with video games, when you make them, somebody would come with this great, like this book. Here it is, this is what we're gonna make, and we start page 1 and we start making it. It was never like that. It was like, so what do you guys want to do?
At the time, the Japanese games had they had this animation down. I mean, they had just armies of incredibly talented artists. How could you compete?
I started playing with video digitization. That became a huge thing for me during my career. The idea of taking actual images, video images, and getting them into a video game, that was kind of revolutionary.
The only thing that had happened like this prior was a game called Journey. They actually like digitized the heads of 5 frames of the band members, and they would like go. A normal company, right, would go out and buy tens of thousands of dollars worth of equipment and cameras and studio setup and everything. But no, we worked for Eugene Jarvis. He was like, yeah, go out, I bought a camera at Target. It's like one of these, you remember those RCA cameras where you put the videotape on the side and you held it like that? That's what we had, right? It was.
We bought a treadmill that we were able to take the top off because I realized we would have to film people walking in place and teaching actors how to be a video game character. And to my mind, nobody had done that up to that point.
Jack Hager approached me one day and said, hey, Mark, I got this concept for this character. I think you'd be perfect for it.
I came up with that character basically from the old Ironsides TV show with Raymond Burr in a wheelchair. And the wheelchair was mounted with guns, of course.
It really was at the time just another day. I don't think it hit me till decades later that, oh my gosh, my image is still in there. I have daughters now. They're going to see this.
I did have a question. At that point, we had filmed a few characters. We had filmed the environments. And I asked, okay, a rocket launcher is one of your weapons now. And I said, okay, when a player fires the rocket launcher, what happens? And people said, what do you mean? I go, well, I can make it look real. These are real people. The mission was to, make it look real.
The body parts would fly. I mean, I guess this was one of the first, body part games. I think maybe the first.
I remember like George was like, God, this is so cool. I can't believe this is so cool. And I came up and I was really being very gentle about it. I just said, I mean, it is cool, but do you think that's a good thing to put in an arcade where little kids are there?
You have to understand, arcades at that point were still very democratic environments. Any family, any age could walk in without concern.
And this escalated into a huge argument. I just remember it was a huge, huge screaming match. And all I'm saying is, I'm just saying we should think about it. I'm not trying to limit your creativity. I'm not trying to censor you.
I think too, with a game that involved realistic content, when we crossed that bridge of digitizing life, the game was no longer an escape.
I remember actually a member of the board of directors of Williams called the game a surrealistic nightmare. And he was really concerned that there might be some, negative ramifications from releasing this game to the public and felt that the game should be canceled.
With the coin-op business, you're selling that game a quarter at a time. With the home business, once you sell the cartridge, if it was back in the old days, it was a cartridge that fit into a Sega, fit into a Nintendo, and it was a crappy game, okay, you made your money. Coin-op, it was 1 quarter at a time. And if that game sucked, the second quarter, or the third quarter, the fourth quarter wouldn't happen. And in our case, we wouldn't even get out of the test phase.
We had this magic number of like $700. Like, you know, I don't know how that number came up, but we wanted to earn $700 in a week. That would be, if we could do that, you know, we felt like we've got something.
So we put it out there. I remember, I think we actually had some champagne. You know, we were like drinking champagne in this high school arcade.
I remember the first 2 guys that played it, they were literally drug dealers. It was like, these guys walk in, I'm like, these are some bad characters. And they're like, oh, check this out, you know? And they start playing it.
The cool thing was the kids really dug the game, you know, and just this whole new world of kind of like reality. No one had seen anything like that in a video game before.
Even with all the problems in the software and stuff, I think the first week it earned like $742. And we're like, we've done it. We are successful. Yeah, that was the first time that we actually started like going, maybe, you know, maybe there's something here. And that's when we got confident enough to actually make a plan to sell it. You know, like, I think then management all of a sudden, you know, they all of a sudden actually goes, well, maybe we should order some parts for this game, and maybe we should actually plan to build this game at some point.
I don't know if they thought about canceling the game, but it made so much money, I think that thought kind of quickly vanished.
The new game is called NARC. It's manufactured by a company in Chicago, by Williams Electronics, and it's currently the #1 video arcade game in the country.
People were talking about this game that was extremely violent and people could explode and all that sort of stuff, but it was okay because they were drug dealers.
For some players, the carnage is part of the appeal.
I love the gore and the blood and the guts spilling everywhere. And when you hit people, they go flying through the air and their heads smash on the pavement. It's really cool.
Still had at this time Pac-Man sitting next to it and things like Donkey Kong, and now here's NARC with like fast sports cars, drug dealers trying to like take you down, and body parts flying everywhere, and it looked like a movie.
We weren't aware of the changing groundswell and the appetite for aggressive or realistic types of games were, and what NARC brought to that evolution.
One of the things that Williams was so successful at doing was hiring very creative, dynamic designers. But in order to do that, creative people have a tendency sometimes to be kind of off the wall situation. But we tried to bring those people in because we knew that they could design the most successful games.
Ken goes, oh, I want you to meet this guy. He's flying in. His name's Mark Trammell, and he's coming from California. And here comes this larger-than-life dude, tall, big, like, perm blonde hair.
Well, it's funny, the interview process in Chicago was a little bit crazy because, you know, I was kind of Mr. California. I had kind of long hair, and you know, I think I came in there with some white pants on and a blue vest and, you know, kind of looking funny.
Pretty much the conclusion was like, this guy, you know, like, guy's Hollywood, he's crazy, you know, he'll never be able to actually do any real work.
No.
They did not want to hire Mark, and we said, no, we're hiring Mark, whether you like it or not.
We're going, wow, this is a big mistake, you know, and, but, you know, actually, he turned out to be one of the most brilliant designers we ever had.
Even when I interviewed, I said I wanted to revive the dual joystick mechanic. The dual joystick mechanic of Robotron is, it's one of my favorites.
The crazy thing about Robotron, I remember when we came up with that dual stick control thing, and we felt like, okay, this is like gonna be the new standard. Every video game from now on will have to have this, and no one copied it.
Robotron, when I think about that, it's sensory overload. There's so many, you know, rainbow of colors coming at you and the sound effects. And so I was kind of in that vein of trying to duplicate that experience. And so we started kind of plugging away at the game, and it only took maybe a couple of weeks before I realized this Tobias guy was just a rock star.
You know, the first game I worked on was Smash TV. The funny thing about it was I always looked at it as temporary. Like I thought, I'm gonna do this for a while, I'm gonna save my money, and I'm either gonna draw comic books or I'm going to Cal Arts.
I remember when we brought him in, I thought he hated me. You know, I thought, you know, it's like, because he doesn't smile that much. He doesn't talk that much. And I just go, wow, this guy, like, I think he hates me, you know.
I remember thinking to myself, wow, I'm working with gods. You know, I mean, I thought that these are gods, and just was, you know, was super excited about working with them.
A big film at the time, of course, was Running Man. RoboCop was in that same era. We just had the idea to take these characters and turn them into a game show.
I'd buy that for $1.
There's this consumerism gone crazy, futuristic world, you know, where, you know, a toaster is more important than human life.
You know, Eugene was the king. You know, we would all go to him for advice.
We were just starting the Boss Monster, which I guess was Mutoid Man. And we reached the point where you blew off his head.
And so I remember creating the little blood spatters and watching the characters on screen kind of explode. I remember the first time I had done it, I kind of minimized the impact because I thought, oh, that's looking pretty gory, and I dialed it back.
I think John was opposed to just how many bloody chunks I put on the screen.
Everybody goes, oh, that's amazing, that's awesome, you know. And I was going, yeah, it's all right, you know, like, and I go, you know, multiply that by 100, you know. and so
they pushed, you know, hey, more blood, more blood.
This boiling fountain of blood, you know, and it was just like, that's gonna get people's attention. I mean, but it almost looked so alive, you know, just like this cauldron of just boiling blood.
He said, now, you know what a game is? I said, no. He said, a game is 100 of those fucking cool things, and now you have one. And he walked out of my office. So I was like, okay, well, I'm on the right track.
In terms of how the games did earn money, we'd call that percentaging, and that was largely up to the game designer to pay attention to moments in the game where you might want to lock down a player and you might want to give them a greater challenge.
We wanted to crush the player, and if you're like crushed by some little guy, or you know, you get shot in the back by, you know, a ant or something, I mean, it's like, wait a minute, that's not fair. You know, that guy couldn't have killed me, that guy's a wimp. But if it's some monstrous guy that's 30 feet tall, you know, on like tank treads running around, and he kills you, it's like, well, you know, that dude was badass. I mean, that's a badass dude. You know, obviously he's gonna kill me a few times before I, you know, figure out how to deal with it. You accepted it. You accepted your death and gladly paid for more.
Arcade games were built around, you play for this chunk of time and then you give us another quarter. It's like, oh man, I was hoodwinked for decades. Like, people complain about mobile game microtransactions, but arcade games were doing that decades before that in way more nefarious ways.
Supposedly within Smash TV was this pleasure dome that never existed.
Well, I guess I'm a bit of a scammer. I just kind of did it on a whim because I couldn't bring myself to just having a message that said, congratulations, go away and never play this game again. It didn't make sense to just, you know, shun people.
And he figured, you know what? We'll just tell them it's there. And since it's so late in the game, the majority of players will never even know.
I remember just feeding mountains of tokens and quarters into Smash TV in the arcade and trying to get to the pleasure domes and could never make it there. And I figured, well, you know, I didn't try hard enough.
So when Ken Fedesna found out that I had done that and that there was no pleasure dome, you know, he said, you've got to resolve it somehow. And so we, you know, we put together a new room and we actually supported it. But of course, not every distributor or arcade owner would get the new EPROMs to upgrade their machine.
You know, with a lot of things that happened in those days, we may not like it, but if the game ended up doing well, we kind of would shrug our shoulders and say, okay, well, let's move on to the next thing. Don't do that again. We wouldn't make that big of a deal of it.
So I managed to find a guy online, much like myself, who like he probably spent his whole life like, I'm gonna find these goddamn pleasure domes, and he somehow found a version of the ROM chips that had the pleasure domes in them, the upgrade. And I remember getting this chip in the mail and swapping it out and booting it up and seeing the new version, and then finally, I reached the pleasure domes, and it was really just a bunch of like girls in bikini icons that you could run around and scoop up. It was pretty lame. Whoever was responsible for, for that quest taking me like 20 years to reach the pleasure domes, you should just be ashamed. And if you never reach the pleasure domes, if you're one of those people, I will tell you it was not worth it once you get there. It's just just shitty. All right.
There was a grittiness about producing product, about making games at Williams Electronics that I think certainly had an effect on the types of games that we produced.
We were in a big factory. We had rats coming through ceilings, we had water leaks, floods. It was part of what Neil fostered, was a hungry, dirty, grungy atmosphere.
Yeah, being in Chicago, I think it comes out of the grit of the manufacturing process. I think it's a lot to do with the personalities of all the people and the collective personalities as we all kind of, went for the down and dirty sometimes.
We weren't afraid and we weren't troubled by the idea of having people compete because, we thought that it would be helpful enhancing their animal spirits to really come up with something special.
Back when you go back to the pinball days, in the 60s and 70s and all that other stuff, you had basically three major pinball companies. You had Gottlieb, you had Bally, and you had Williams. Bally was the leaders at the time. They were the first ones to come out with solid-state pinball machines. They acquired Midway, and then they were running the whole thing, and they then were able to get Space Invaders and, of course, Pac-Man and all the other stuff that went on at the time.
The rivalry between Bally and Bally Midway and Williams was, a really long-standing, highly competitive, love-hate, maybe more hate than love relationship.
Well, this is supposed to be Bally's big new, answer to Pac-Man and all of that kind of stuff. The next Pac-Man, the next generation. What do you think? Think you'll ever play Roto again?
I probably would, trying to figure out what's going on,
Everybody at Bally Midway had been looking at Williams for years as them. They were the other guys. They did these type of games and required enormous skill, and I did games that were idiot-proof and silly and funny.
So we really wanted to bury those guys. We wanted to bury Bally Midway. We felt that they relied on licensing brands too much. So, so we just felt they were phonies and incompetence, and we were going to teach them a lesson,
And they were them, and we were us, and all of a sudden now, they were buying us.
They were diversifying into health clubs and casinos. They decided to get out of the coin-op industry, so it became available for us to buy, and that's why we wound up purchasing them.
Yeah, we won the war. We killed these guys, and then the crazy thing is then we hired all their managers, and they became our managers. and then it was, I don't know, it wasn't a year or two before. We had our name changed to Midway.
We changed the branding of our video games from Williams to Midway because Midway had a stronger consumer presence.
I think I could see Eugene's emotion in it. We were fighting a war, for our jobs, to get video started. It was the Williams name, and a lot of us, we all took very much pride in the Williams name.
We won this war. We're Williams. Why are we becoming Midway? I mean, they should Bally Midway be becoming Williams. And he goes, you know what? I paid $5 million for that fucking name. We're gonna use it. It's like.
The only people that we were able to actually attract was Brian Colin and Jeff Nauman, who had done Rampage and Xenophobe prior to the acquisition, and then came over, and their first game with us was Arch Rivals, which was a big success at the time.
The income from Arch Rivals basically paid for the entire price of the merger. So really, it was a free deal. It was actually, Williams got Bally Midway for nothing. And
I'll have to send you the waving goodbye photo. You'll appreciate it. It shows what people thought about the buyout.
I got a call, my phone rang, and it was Neil Nicastro, the CEO. He goes, hey, what would you think about doing a Terminator 2 game? And I was like, there's going to be a Terminator 2?
Arrangements were made for George and I to fly out to Hollywood to meet with Jim Cameron and his people and to show demonstrations of what our digitizing hardware and software was capable of.
We put on this videotape of us creating NARC, and Jim Cameron sees it, and he just freaks out. He's like, this is awesome.
Cameron was great. I mean, it was like, you guys are making movies like we are.
And he just stands up at some point and he goes, give these guys everything they need. And we're like, Jack and I are like,
what was interesting to us when we made the Terminator 2 arcade game is I'm pretty sure it was the first movie that ever had on the set of the movie, shooting simultaneously to the movie, the arcade game people.
We had access to all the actors and everything from the movie, but like Arnold, we didn't really have access to him. He was a little more expensive, more difficult, but we had access to his stunt double that we could use. And once he had a prosthetic jaw that he put on, and he could look exactly like Arnold.
What's not commonly known is that Linda Hamilton actually has a twin sister who's a stunt double and also her stand-in. And in fact, at the end of Terminator 2, there is a sequence where the T-1000 replicates itself as Sarah Connor, and then the real Sarah Connor comes behind. In actual fact, there's no trick photography in that shot. That's actually her and her twin sister. So her twin sister came in and did all the stuff and was quite happy to do it.
Robert Patrick was so enthusiastic, he kept asking me, so it's going to look like me? And I said, yes, it's going to be you. We're going to digitize you. He goes, really? We're going to videotape you, and it's going to be you in the game. I think he was just as excited about that as he was about his role in the movie.
I think what's really fun about the arcade experience with peripherals is it kind of allows you to have a gaming experience that you might not be able to get in your house. Having that thing that you're holding in your hands makes it feel more like a performance.
That was like one of the most egregious quarter-second games too. Like you would get killed after 3 seconds and have to put it in, but the graphics, again, it was like graphics from the movie scanned in, so you're actually playing Arnold and fighting the T-1000, and there were elements from the movie, so it really felt like you were in the movies. But by the time you reached the end and defeated the T-1000, you had spent more than like it would cost to watch the movie 10 times.
See, when a game went on test, we all went out and kind of, we'd go watch it, have dinner, and come and watch it. And the game was killing people in literally people were lasting like 18 seconds. I remember John Tobias one time, he's like standing next to it, and we're watching it, and like these guys just got wasted. And he just turns around and he goes, that was 18 seconds. They died in 18 seconds, and it's like, he's yelling. I'm like, don't tell them they just lost their money. It was so funny.
T2 was a good success for Midway. It opened the door for a more cinematic experience.
It got Midway to a new level. It just all of a sudden was like, this is what it means to sell a crap ton of games, and this is what it means to earn $1,000 a week, and just, it was just nonstop.
It's Judgment Day. So we released T2, and it was doing great. And I think this was around the holidays. As a matter of fact, I know it was New Year's Eve. And our marketing person called me at home and said, Jack, are you available on New Year's Day to come downtown to the studio and be interviewed by Entertainment Tonight? So I went down the next day, and there was a reporter there, and the game was there, and she was asking lots of questions about the development, like, how did you get Arnold into the game? And wow, that really looks like Robert Patrick, those sort of questions. And right in the middle of it was a question that was framed very different than any other question she had been asking me. So in the game, you are shooting police officers. How do you feel about that?
It's very clear in the movie that Arnold never kills anybody. He shoots them in the knee. And they fall over and they're no longer a threat. And that's exactly what happens in the game.
And I told her to stop right then. And I said, you need to convey my answer in its entirety, because I felt very personal about this. And I said I had family members who were in the police force, so I took it very seriously.
And what it ended up being was kind of this real accusatory, hard-hitting, like, so how do you feel about making a video game that encourages people to shoot cops?
It was our first experience in how video games were directly impacting the entertainment community and, through the media, society as a whole.
You know, in some ways, I think the old saying is that bad publicity is never really bad. It's publicity, and it gives you some notoriety and some attention, and maybe people that might not have been aware of the game before have now become aware of because of this free publicity. So it worked to our advantage ultimately.
By the early 90s, I mean, we were on a roll at Midway, and the whole NARC technology, our photorealistic digitization was just killing the world. But as studio head, I really didn't have the cycles to like do something new. A dream of mine was, what's the next phase of the industry? And it's 3D texture mapping. I could see that that was going to happen, and I really wanted to do a driving game.
Going to work Monday morning, and the person that had the office next to me, I noticed was empty. And I was like, what's going on? And I noticed a couple cubicles were empty. I called Ken, I'm like, did I miss something? Did I miss something that was going on? I don't understand. And he's, oh yeah, Eugene and Mark, they had a project they wanted to work on, but they're gonna work on it out of house, And out of house meant they had quit and they started their own company. And it was like,
they had tremendous talent, and there was Turmell, Petro, Jack Hager, the art side had John Tobias.
The first time I heard that, I remember feeling lost a little bit. It's almost like your parent is leaving the house kind of a thing.
In true Williams style, nobody decided to say anything. They never sort of like dealt with the fact that the manager of the video department was gone. They just kind of left us, Lord of the Flies style.
I always looked at him as being kind of the godfather of the industry and sort of the leader of, our studio. And so when he was walking away, that, was not a good feeling. Here we've got the godfather, the doctor of video games, Eugene Jarvis, creator of all. Some call him God. What do you call yourself?
Face.
That's good. That's a wrap. Let's end it there.
In the early 80s, the games were metaphor. So it wasn't real spacemen. It was little metaphorical bleeps and, little animated sprites that represented a human or an alien or a spaceship. The more you got into realism, definitely, I think, brought in more of the male aggressive game player.
The games are louder, the graphics are more detailed, there's lots more blood, it feels different, and that's something that the companies are really actively advertising. Games have always been violent, so I'm not saying that comes out of nowhere, but it's not the thing that they were kind of leading with before, right?
I think everybody by this point knows the story about Mortal Kombat. It wasn't Mortal Kombat to start out with, and this is probably the greatest story of Midway. Ed Boon and John Tobias.
I think the first time I met him was he was playing his radio really loud in his office. He kept coming next door to us, knocking on our door and coming in, sticking his head in and going, hey, is that too loud? Sounds too loud. And he'd go back and lower his volume a little bit, and he'd come back, hey, is that too loud? And, so that was the first time I met him. I think my first reaction was, who the fuck is this guy?
We had, I think, about a 3-month gap in the factory's production line, and they said, we can give you a game, and it was like some ridiculous period of time. It was like 6 months. Give you a game in 6 months to fill the gap. All right, what is it? It's a fighting game.
Karate Champ was a fighting game that I had played in high school. And I loved that game, and I thought, wow, that would lend itself to a sort of this one-on-one fighting game idea. I was a huge martial arts fan. You know, I loved old kung fu movies. In the early 90s, there were two up-and-coming martial arts stars. There was Van Damme, and then there was Steven Seagal. We thought, wow, we have to get one of those guys involved.
Not bad, kid. And we're going to use Jean-Claude Van Damme's image in this game like we, you know, now have begun doing in our other video games. Okay.
We wanted him to come in to do some videos, you know, to digitize him and things like that, the voiceover and whatever. From what I remember is he just wasn't cooperative.
This was a filler game for us, you know, just something to fill the gap. And, excuse my language, okay? But I said, well, Kenny, tell him to go fuck off, okay? Tell these guys, make up their own characters and put their own characters in the game. Make a fighting game with their own characters. Okay, forget about Jean-Claude Van Damme.
I thought that was great. Like, I thought, you know, the freedom to sort of create our own story and our own characters and all those things was appealing. The first character we taped on Mortal Kombat was Johnny Cage.
I remember first showing up to the first day of shooting Mortal Kombat, showing up to film and literally having to spend an hour with John and Ed cleaning up an area for us to film because there was no room for us to film anything.
When we taped the Johnny Cage character, I think we might have worked on the game for at least a month before we taped the second character. I think the idea was we wanted to kind of take our learnings on Johnny Cage and figure out really what it was that we were messing with. If a character threw a kick, you know, they'd want to throw it as fast as they could. And so the problem for us was it would become a blur.
John is like, Bub, can't you float? Try to float. Hold yourself in the air because it's going to come out blurry. I was like, Bub, really?
And that was a learning process. You know, we didn't walk in with all the answers. It was just sort of, we would tape, you know, a character doing moves, and then we'd go back and work with the actual artwork. You know, Ed would start to work with the graphics in the game. You know, he would kind of come back with the reality of, well, we have to do that in, you know, 3 frames or 4 frames. You know, speed was super important to him.
And we go on our review, you know, we go look at the games, and it was early on that when we saw up on the screen, they had fighters fighting fast as hell. We said, holy shit, okay, this thing is great. And what was a 6-month production time to fill a hole in the factory, we threw that out the window and realized, continue where you're going because this thing is great.
It's just in obnoxious mode.
John wanted to do a ninja. And right away it was like, I was like, a ninja? Ninja's been already you know, everybody's a ninja, it's friggin' 80s. But in China, there's these type of ninja.
The Chinese Ninja Connection was the name of the book. It was written as this historical book about some order of Chinese assassins who had sort of predated the Japanese ninja.
So actually you bought that book, and you know, Scorpion and Sub-Zero are originally from that clan.
The whole thing was like the name was made up, the whole story ended up being bullshit.
You have people out there that care about the lore of Mortal Kombat. You have people that can go through like, okay, well, this is Sub-Zero's brother, and he's not wearing the mask here, and this is original Sub-Zero, and then there's classic Sub-Zero. They can run all that stuff down because those characters have just become so iconic over the years. I mean, wrestling was stealing stuff from Mortal Kombat. Glacier, the wrestler, was just Sub-Zero.
You know, while I may, you know, have created maybe the visual qualities of the characters, you know, the backstory and whatnot. Really, the core of the product was, you know, its playability, and that started with Ed. You know, that always came from him sort of playing the game, and he would sit in his office for hours and, you know, call people in to kind of, hey, try this, hey, try that.
His games reflect his personality. I think his games bring out the way that Ed really feels about things because his nature is outrageous.
There was a period at the end of a match where you kind of got a free hit off of your opponent, and we wanted to kind of put an exclamation point on it. And for us, it was always, you know, hey, watch me go do an uppercut. Somewhere along the way, Ed put in Johnny Cage punching off, you know, the opponent's head.
I was like, you can't, I was like in shock. I was like, you can't do that. Holy cow, I was like, it looked so real to me that I was like, Boop, you just killed me. And he was like, yeah, isn't that really cool? And I was like, dude, you can't do that. And he goes, we can do whatever we want. And I was like, looked at him, I was like, you're right, we can, because no boss has ever let it. I've never seen a boss hanging out with us. We could shoot whatever we want, and that's what they get.
I was never telling Ed Boon, hey, don't decapitate that guy's head, okay? Instead, you know, I remember suggesting to him, go, can't you do a fatality where you rip the guy's leg off, and beat the crap out of him with it, with his own leg? From a management standpoint, we also believed that's what the customer wanted.
He buried it in some button joystick combination that he thought no one would ever discover. I remember the players discovered it right away. Like, it was the first weekend they discovered it. And we were there at some point watching the reactions.
Oh, everybody kind of, you know, when they saw the fatalities. They knew this was something different.
We knew right then and there that there was no way we were going to ever take those out. And if anything, we need to give them more.
Back in the day, I had a little piece of paper that had all of the combos for the fatalities written down. I mean, obviously you have to memorize them at some point, but I would like whip that little cheat sheet out and like quickly type in all the buttons to make sure I got it.
They've got this game, Mortal Kombat, and you can kill people. And I was like, it's hard to even know what that even meant. But I'm like, all right, dude, well, we're gonna check this out. And sure enough, in the back of this skateboard shop, they had an MK machine. And I just took one look at it, was like, Johnny Cage. They are killing people.
It was like a big FU to everybody. Like, oh, you don't want us to make video games like this? Well, how about we turn it up to 11 and, you know, just make them even worse than anything you can imagine. I'm sure they were all just, you know, laughing heartily.
You know, we're doing this stuff with Liz. You know, she's athletic, kick-ass.
She goes up into that. Yeah. Okay. There you go. Right.
We're going to go to fatality. And Liz looks at him and goes, I'm not going to do a fatality. Why can't I just give him like a flower or something in peace and love?
Sonya wins fatality.
And then, of course, came the brutalities, the babalities, which are so ridiculous, and the friendships.
By the end of its production run, the first Mortal Kombat game, I believe, ended up selling about 27,000 units.
And I guarantee if you ask John and Ed separately, there's no way they had a vision that it was going to go the way it went. I mean, none of us did. None of us could imagine that you could sell that many games again in our era.
Being a nerd and being aspirational about the games industry in general from a young age, I knew some names. I knew Mark Cerny had created Marble Madness. And I remember hearing these stories about a guy named Mark Turmell who had created Toy Bazaar for Activision.
Mark is one of the nation's leading designers of home video software, a former boy wonder who did not burn out, a creative computer whiz who at the dinosaur-like age of 23 is still cranking out video games for the home market. How many teenagers, after all, make it into People magazine and find themselves in other articles described as the hottest designer in the industry?
I love golf. I go on streaks on golf. I get addicted and then I get frustrated. But I love basketball and gambling.
So when I recognized Mark Turmell's name in the credits of NBA Jam, that was a revelation. I know that guy. I don't know that guy, but I know that guy. I remember here, whatever happened to Mark Turmell? Oh, he's, you know, he's making one of the greatest arcade games of all time.
The rules of basketball are so perfect. You've got a three-point line, you've got timers for the shot clock, you've got periods that you know, we could tighten up to be the right time frame. So just the inherent rules of basketball made for really a great product strategy.
People have asked me about the influence of arch rivals on NBA Jam, obviously, because it's a lot of the same gameplay mechanic, and we were first. But all I really know is that I've been told that Mark Turmell was a fan.
You know, I think maybe I've played that game 3 or 4 times total in my life. It's just not a game that really appealed to me with, you know, you could kind of pull the pants down. They had a punch.
He asked us about our interest in doing licensed products, officially licensed products, and we were resistant, mainly because on my side I didn't want to do photographic stuff. I wanted to keep doing cartoons. I felt that's where the humor was going to be.
Neil Nicastro came into my office one day and he said, you know, how come you're not pursuing the NBA license?
If they're the real basketball players, that's what the players are going to want to be. They're going to want to, they have their favorite basketball stars. They want to play as those basketball stars. That's what we have to do.
Made the pitch.
Williams Electronics is currently developing an arcade-based 4-player video basketball game, one which employs lifelike digitized graphics. First, basketball players are videotaped in a studio performing hundreds of moves. Artists digitize this footage into individual frames, which are stored and played back in sequence or animated to create a video basketball player capable of performing on command.
Well, the NBA's immediate reaction was, hey, thanks, but no thanks. Their kind of understanding or perception of the arcade business was rooted there in Times Square, which was a very seedy area at the time, and they did not want the NBA logo presented in that atmosphere.
I remember a comment internally of like, don't they realize how much money they're going to make? Seriously? I mean, we're not even going to cover the salary of one player. Let's face it, the NBA will continue whether they do a game with us or not.
So our video guy, once again, he said, I can solve this. He went out to family entertainment centers around Chicago, and he took videos to show what a real arcade is like. We sent that back to the NBA to tell them this is what it's like, not Times Square. They accepted that, they understood, and they started talking deal terms with Roger Sharp.
Understand and appreciate that there had never been a professional sports league license in coin-op.
Well, the logistics of getting all the players in our studio, and then the logistics of having them do every animation over and over and over again, because there was, you know, a few hundred animations, and then the logistics of then going through and stripping out all those, it couldn't be done. Like, there's just no way.
Okay, all right, that's good.
We figured out a system for using an attachment system that games typically use for putting, like, you know, different types of guns or weapons or props in characters' hands.
And so Sean Liptak trimmed off a head, and he pasted that head on to prove that we could kind of change up a different, you know, flesh tone, a different look.
There were 16 different head angles that we had to use. One looking forward, one looking up, one looking down, one looking left, one looking right, one looking left up, one looking left down, one left right, all the way around.
And again, this is before the internet. This is before, you know, any easily accessible resource. So we were looking at VHS tapes of the biggest dunks of all time, looking at the athletes and trying to trim out their faces at these different angles.
We thought, hey, why don't we put our heads in? You know, like let's be in the game, you know, ourselves. How cool would that be? That's worth doing the game right there for. We got you know, everybody from around who wanted to be in there, and we'd get them into the studio and we'd shoot all our angles. And then there was one guy that we worked with, Sheridan Osler, who came in with a derby hat on his head. And we're like, hey, Sheridan, you want us to shoot you with that hat on your head? It's like, yeah, this is my derby, you know. And so we go, okay. And so we shot him with the derby on his head and put him in the game and like didn't think anything of it. And then I think, we put the game on test and people freaked out because it was a person with a derby. You'd never seen a person with a derby playing a basketball game before. So like within a few weeks, throughout the arcades that we had it on test in, everybody's playing Sheridan's head with a derby hat. Funny because we got an NBA license, but people like playing the special characters more than they like playing the NBA players.
But we were doing things now like putting in the Mortal Kombat characters.
The NBA had a fit when they saw that there were Mortal Kombat characters.
And I thought, oh, gamers are going to love that, a little crossover thing, that's great. And so Mark says that on the record in an interview, and I go and I type it up. And a week and a half later, I get a phone call from Mark, which I'm not expecting. And he goes, yeah, I needed to follow up with you on something that came up in our interview. Remember that thing about the Mortal Kombat secret characters and Tournament Edition? I'm like, yeah, I'm looking forward to that. He goes, yeah. We've been on the phone with the NBA, and they're not really into the idea.
And it was not a good situation, and we had to scrabble very, very quickly to produce a new set of ROMs that did not have the Mortal Kombat characters in them.
That traditional gaming audience that wants to find secrets, that needs to collect every coin in the game, that wants to know every secret warp in every level, that absolutely was catnip to all of the hardcore gamers that were like, well, I know something you don't know.
Having actual announcers, I couldn't push them into the high energy part of being an announcer voice for a quarter at a time video game in an arcade setting.
I had never done any voiceover before. I had never done any sports work before related to acting or voiceover. It was just acting work, stage work, and work at Second City.
So I got Tim in, and he was kind of doing his Marv Albert, but really he just became himself and became that actor.
It was like this. John came in, gave me a script. He said big, he said loud, and I went, he's on fire, rejected, boom shakalaka, he's heating up. And that was about it.
And think about making that system work. We're talking about a system that is calling the play-by-play action, splicing in player names at different levels of inflection.
The reason for the different inflections is just for that variety of before a shot, after a shot, in the middle of a shot. Pippin for 3. Pippin with the dunk. Pippin with the monster jam. Pippin, Pippin, Stockton, Stockton, Stockton!
Rebound, Matt Burn.
And there used to be a game called Run and Gun by Konami that was the first game that actually the camera work seemed to like follow you down the court. I go down, I listen to that game, and I hear the guy go, nice shot.
Take him up, put it up. 3, yes, good shot. Way to go.
What is this guy? Is he medicated or something? That's not how you call a basketball game. I'd go down to the other end and hear, get that stuff out of here, rejected! And I could feel the effect that my voice had on that extra amping up of the situation. So sometimes I'd sneak up behind him, guy would take a shot and I go, ugly shot, puts up a break, or get that stuff out of here. He'd turn around and go, hey, you sound like the guy. I go, I am the guy, dude.
Eugene Jarvis always told me, make sure the player gets more powerful. Never take something away from him. Well, what if we, put the player into a mode where he's on fire and everything's a swish? And we knew right away that, there was a mechanic there that made sense.
And I was saying, oh, that's unrealistic. It's not, that's not cool. It's going to be fantasy then. People aren't going to take it seriously or whatever. And they're like, no, it's video game. It's totally video game. It's totally cool. It's totally cool. And I'm all like, it's not going to be cool at all. Nobody's going to like that.
He said, I won't give you the art. I won't give you flame art. And so I actually went back into Smash TV and took the, the flame explosions attach them to the ball. And we started the smoke mode and the on fire.
First time that we had seen in the arcade, and these kids who had been playing the game already for a couple weeks had seen, on fire and slamming and shattering the backboard. And the guy just went, ah, he raised his arms up in the air, oh, hell no, and ran around the arcade inside. He ran around 4 times. Everybody screamed. Everybody was like, ah, they're like holding their heads like they just saw like the second coming. And we were like looking at each other, we're like, oh my God. It's just such an iconic part of, and just felt so good to see people get that excited about something. We were like, yeah, I think it's gonna be pretty cool.
This is bad, man. This is bad.
If you're playing against the computer, it's never going to allow you to get too far in front. You'll start missing shots, or the computer will start missing shots a lot if it's too far, if the scores are too far in front. So it doesn't allow the scores to get too far apart, and it keeps the excitement of, oh, I can overtake you in the last minute, the last throw, oh, I can win.
If you're in the 4th quarter, and you have, just a few seconds left and have an opportunity to tie the game, to have it go into overtime, and take a shot at the buzzer, the chances are so much higher from the half-court line than it would be from laying it up at any other point in the game.
Rubberbanding is I don't know if that was a Mark Turmell call or what the deal was, but the rubberbanding in NBA Jam and then later in NFL Blitz and Showtime and all that sort of stuff, it's almost evil. But also it makes for really heightened moments of like, oh man, we went to overtime again. What are the odds? Turns out the odds are pretty good.
We were getting calls about games that were broken. I said, what? Because it's one of the things, you put a game on a test, it's gotta work, okay? And to have a game that's not working, it's like the height of stupidity.
And the game was supposedly down. And we says, what the heck's going on here? So you go out there and you couldn't put any more quarters in the game.
It had accumulated so many quarters that had jammed the coin mech, and you couldn't put any more quarters in it.
Unheard of collections. At all of our test locations, NBA Jam is collecting between 124 and 167% of what Mortal Kombat did during its first 6 weeks.
Jurassic Park was the biggest film at the time, and it was breaking all kinds of earning records. It made $350 million, and that was a milestone that people said, we can't believe it. It's incomprehensible. And here comes NBA Jam, and Mark said, can you tell me about how popular this really is? I can tell you this, NBA Jam made $1 billion. And I said, in quarters?
Anybody that just liked games and liked sports and walked around a mall would hear and see that game, because in malls they were like arcades and there was always groups of people around it and they're like, what's that?
And when people are playing together, they're probably more likely to keep playing because you can't just walk off from your friend that you're playing with.
Whereas some games are abstract, or some people just don't want to blast aliens, or they don't want to fight other people. The idea of it's like basketball, but without all of those pesky rules, that becomes a very appealing thing to people that would be into sports but wouldn't be caught dead in an arcade. But here, this is the perfect gateway.
The home versions of the early Mortal Kombat games were released by Acclaim.
I remember seeing TV ads for the games that partly fueled the kind of concern that parents had about Mortal Kombat, because it always emphasized like gangs of young kids running around the streets screaming, Mortal Kombat! I think parents felt there was a revolution about to happen, because that's how it was portrayed in the marketing materials, that somehow their kids were involved in this weird thing and suddenly they'd turn around and it'd be like a 1984 kind of situation where all the parents would be thrown into jail and the kids would run amok.
The home games, when they came out, they were marketed to, I think, a younger audience.
When we filmed it, we didn't film it for a home version, we filmed it for arcade. And who is, at the arcade? Kids with their own money.
Actually, when I think back of all the time I spent in arcades, I never remember seeing too many moms walking around.
After a $10 million advertising campaign, Mortal Kombat, debuting in home video today, is expected to sell 2 million copies at $50 a pop. A horrifying possibility for parents who can't believe the game makers are fantasizing about decapitation and murder.
So now moms and dads are looking at their kids playing this game, and they see, you know, heads being decapitated, skulls being pulled off of bodies.
I don't think I'll have this at home, no.
You don't think so?
A little bit
you
too
look
violent.
a little startled.
Yeah, it's a little too violent, I think.
That's pretty bad. That's just plain gross.
I'm sure moms were walking through the living room and looking at the game that their kids were playing and then writing a letter to their congressman, like, I bought Mortal Kombat thinking it was a fun fighting game, and
It's crazy to me how some people don't see the humor in Mortal Kombat. I mean, one of the taglines is toasty. What game does that? I think that humor was essential to its success, because without it, I think it just would have been almost violent for the sake of being violent.
Seeing Mortal Kombat held up as a scapegoat for societal ills was a direct parallel to what rock and roll had gone through the 50s, through the 70s, what comic books had done in the 50s. It was the latest thing for the previous generation to blame society's problems on and say, these kids today, they're going to ruin the world.
Children of different ages, and that is exactly what...
Many companies would shudder when they see their product talked about in an unfavorable light by a U.S. senator.
The game narrator instructs the player to finish, and I quote, finish his opponent. The player may then choose a method of murder ranging from ripping a heart out to pulling off the head of the opponent with spinal cord attached.
I personally delighted in it because we saw a clear effect every time someone was making a big deal in the press about Mortal Kombat, and it was on TV. We saw the sales of the home product jump up, and if we happened to have something in the arcade, you know, it was probably also seeing the benefit of a jump.
And we hope very much that you step back and take into account our common responsibilities as citizens here, and not only as people who are employed to maximize profits.
Then you had the issue of Nintendo and Sega.
We were starting to encroach on Nintendo's share of market. And one of the reasons was that we were appealing to an older age group. And part of that older age appeal became Mortal Kombat in its original form.
Yeah, the Nintendo version was very neutered. The blood was turned into like a sweat.
People who played it knew what was happening, so I thought that was a silly thing to do, and I thought it detracted from the game. So I was committed that we were going to show all the blood that existed in the arcade version of Mortal Kombat.
It had that blood code. It had two codes. It had the ABACABB, the main blood code, and then it had the dullard code, down, up, left, A, right, down, for the cheat menu, and then you could get reptile and do all this other stuff. And yeah, so the Genesis version was the version as far as anyone I knew was concerned. The SNES version was just a wreck.
We wanted to be different, we wanted to be edgy, we wanted to make the point that we weren't this nice, clean, young kids company that Nintendo was.
Sega used the slogan like, we do what Nintendo don't. Nintendo would never do this because they're so family friendly, but we do other things, right? And there's something like really kind of delightfully salacious about that.
We outsold the Nintendo version by 5 to 10 times more than what was sold on the Nintendo system.
Will you ever draw the line where you say it's too violent?
Yeah, there's of course we're going to draw the line.
Okay.
Certainly, yeah.
Scorpion wins. Fatality.
There's an ad for a poster in the attract mode for Revolution X, and since playing through that game start to finish, I've been one button click away about 4 times from buying that poster on eBay. It's got the girl with like the New World Order, or it's the New Order. But yeah, that game, I would really like to know. I look forward to watching this finished product because I hope you have the story about how that game came to be in there, because what the hell?
I got this speech 2 times from Neil at work. It was like, okay, you know, what, you can do whatever you want, but it comes from these 3 choices: sports, driving, fighting, or gun. You can't do sports, you can't do driving, and you can't do fighting, so take your pick. So I guess we're doing another gun game. It was supposed to be Generation X with Public Enemy. That was the original concept, yeah. So 2 things happened. Number 1, we got a letter from, I believe it was Marvel, that said, we own Generation X, so back off.
I remember George being very, very angry about that. You know, he wanted to put into Generation. I remember him saying, you know what, I'm so pissed at this, I'm so angry. I think we should put some sort of superhero all in yellow spandex that you get to shoot a lot.
The second is Public Enemy would have nothing to do with us. So, don't know why, but, so we had to really like, okay, strike 1 and 2, so what are we gonna do now? So we changed the name to Revolution X, and we started thinking really hard about who we would have. We knew we wanted music in the game.
Initial premise was that we were going to get bands, plural, together. Do country western, do hard rock, do this, and it was just like, seriously?
Our marketing person, Roger Sharp, God love him, said, Jack, how would you like to go out and speak with Aerosmith? What do you think of Aerosmith? And I'm like, my God, Aerosmith is awesome, and I love their music. I bought their music with my own money since I was a kid.
So we got in front of a camera and just like made our pitch, and Jack was really good. I was horrible on the pitch. It was like, we're super pasty white, and we're just like, hey, we're from Chicago and make video games. You know, we wanna use you in a video game, and I go, this is gonna go zero far.
Hi guys, I'm Jack Hager.
Hi, George Petro.
And we're from Williams Bally Midway in Chicago, makers of exciting and new pinball and video games.
There were things I heard on the radio at that time that were dealing with the impact of music on youth culture and how it literally saved lives and gave meaning to every generation.
They can't go to their parents because their parents didn't grow up with computers. They don't know what's happening in the world or what's going to happen in the next 20 years. It's a real difficult time to grow up. But the one stable thing that has always kept kids sane is their music.
You know, you're this youth that like is getting oppressed, and Aerosmith becomes like your guiding light. They leave clues all through the world, and they leave these videos, and you know, you just go to see them at an underground club.
You get right up close to the stage, Aerosmith jamming. All of a sudden, these New Order troops come on the stage and push Aerosmith off the stage. And it's like, what happened, you know? And you guys are like, whoa, come on, you know, get away from me. And you decide, hey, I'm gonna fight this. So you use your gun, you're shooting everybody.
So we did it. We wrapped up the videotape, sent it to their management, and like a week later, they called. They go, yeah, the band saw it. They love it. They want to do it. They're in. So we, you know, we're like, what?
Aerosmith has always been one of those bands that was the most eager to take digital risks. They did a game for PC that was a virtual guitar early on. This is way before Guitar Hero, any of the other guitar abstraction music games. So when Revolution X became announced, all of my friends were like, wow, Aerosmith. I'm like, this is what they do. They were the risk takers. They thought digital entertainment was fun. That seemed like a perfect fit to me. Besides, I'm sure they looked at Journey back in the day and said, we could do that.
They showed up. We had this big bus that they came from the airport in. Steven Tyler was the first guy off the bus. He had watched everything.
There's Steven Tyler up there, and George is just saying, all right, now do this and do that. I mean, they're just doing whatever we ask.
Excellent. Hey, come on in. You got some wings? Welcome home.
Yeah, we didn't have a drum set, because I remember the drummer had to air drum, and we said, we're going to build your drum set digitally. Remember where all your drums are. So, and he would play, because, I mean, he's a professional drummer, so he just... We had a whole looping session with the band. So we would take we took all the footage, and then we sent it to the sound department, and they brought up the footage.
This is all like combat stuff. I mean, you know, heat of the battle kind of, no, stuff like that. So, you know, pretty high energy level and that kind of yelling, you know, stuff. About that long, too. Give me just 3 or 4 of them. No. No! That's great. Can you give me one that's really deep in your throat, like a no? No! That's cool. All right.
Awesome. Excellent. Excellent.
All right.
All right. Rock and roll. I'm not going to say it.
Okay, I'm sorry. What is that? Is that just too much, huh?
They go like rock and roll. I mean, that's like, come on.
Okay.
Aerosmith looks like they had a half an hour to come in and sit down and go like, you know, it's just like, yeah, all right. And then the keys fly out of the screen, or you get the videotape and put it in, and here's Steven Tyler's going like, you did good, now go do this. That stuff is so corny, but like kind of amazing.
It's a gun game, but what if the gun shot compact discs? And it's a crazy idea, I know. It makes little sense.
The sound of a CD launching like a grenade launcher. That is part of the core experience to me, and I can listen to that all day.
So much of the discussion of should it be Revolution X music as a weapon or Revolution X music, music as a weapon or music is the weapon. I think there was this humongous amount of email going backwards and forwards about whether it should be music as a weapon. What the hell, who cares?
Unfortunately, people have come to use Revolution X as a punchline. I still unironically like it.
It doesn't match up to T2. It just didn't have the T2 who had so much momentum because of what it was, the movie, the robots. You know, Revolution X was just kind of our sort of creation.
We had this thing where we were supposed to take a quarter every 45 seconds. That's what you were aiming to do with these arcade games. And NBA Jam and Mortal Kombat did that, actually. But most of the other games didn't. And you ended up having to try and make story games really, really difficult to be constantly taking money. Well, there's only so much difficulty that someone is going to do in order to play through it once. Because you played through it once and it cost you an arm and a leg, you don't want to do it again now.
But the game just didn't earn. I mean, it's all about the earnings. It always is about the cash box. How does the cash box, is it filled or it isn't filled? What's my return on investment? If I pay $4,000 or $5,000 for a game, I expect the operators are looking for their return on investment in 6 to 9 months.
We all realize that we bit off a lot in combining such major talent with a cinematic experience, and flying by the seat of our pants game design wasn't going to hack it in the future.
As video games are moving towards movies, this is definitely a step in the right direction. That's what I think is different. It's history, man. History in the making.
One thing I think that really sunk it home for a lot of these guys who are still at Midway was that Eugene Jarvis, who used to be one of their fellow co-workers, had left Midway. And I think that kind of put in each of their minds that there's opportunities for their talent.
At one point, we were contacted by Universal Studios.
They wanted to spin a story around this new thing called, GameWorks that they were trying to start off.
GameWorks, the ultimate entertainment destination. Games, drinks, music, and food.
And so they were looking for people to develop their location-based arcade games.
So we go on this ridiculous trip where the Universal jet that Steven Spielberg flies on is showing up at Midway Airport, and we're all to get on it and like fly out to California. And it was the best experience ever. Number one, it turns out you can get to LA in like 2 hours, if you fly really fast. We meet with the president of Universal. We have lunch with him in the commissary. Like, here's all these goofy video game guys.
So I was usually the guy that would have the balls to like propose some numbers or, paint the picture.
It was just the epitome of Mark, just throwing out these huge numbers that they're going to demand. And it was fun because it was like this confidence of these guys that they've realized they were the value.
I remember hearing all the rumors of competitors courting our guys.
Some of the guys would be getting comments, innuendos, and remarks from, management about, their obligations and employment agreements, what would happen if they left.
If they were going to screw us and leave, we were going to sue the crap out of them, because we created this contractual relationship which prevented them from working for a competitor for at least a year after they left us.
And it was more about making your life difficult than it was about the clause actually being legal. It was about suing you and you having to defend yourself and him having more money than you and being able to outspend you with lawyers, just making your life difficult, so other employers didn't want to hire you.
In the pinball area, when a bunch of guys left our pinball business to work for an upstart, we unleashed our legal dogs on everybody associated with that to sue them, take them to court, and make their life so miserable that they would just eventually throw up their hands and say, we give up.
You know, he really felt ownership over all of us. And, you know, he would yell and say, you know, get your ass back here, you know, what are you doing? You know, he was pretty strong in his opinions.
Although the Universal deal didn't get penned, it did produce the negotiating point and motivation for Midway to pay these guys what they really were worth and recognize the value that they really were bringing to Midway's role and placement in this industry.
I remember Ed and I were in the studio, and Larry Kazanoff was brought through by Ken Fedesna. And Larry was familiar with Midway through Terminator 2.
I heard through the grapevine that Midway was testing an arcade game that was on track to beat our Terminator 2 record. Well, it couldn't have that. So partly just to keep in touch on a friendly basis and partly out of competitive spirit, I went to play it. And I played the game in Neil Nicastro's office on the arcade for 15 minutes. It was Mortal Kombat, and I turned to him afterwards and I said, if you give me the rights to this, I guarantee you, I promise you, I will make it in every medium in the world. Movies, TV, animation, music, live stage, you name it. Because I think this is Star Wars meets Enter the Dragon. And Neil said, you're crazy. I went home and I wandered around an arcade in Westwood, and I was hanging around the Mortal Kombat game. And a little 11-year-old kid slaps a quarter down, and he looks up and he challenges me, and then he beats me. And he was so empowered, you know, you lose, Sub-Zero wins, and I lost. And that kid was thrilled, and I thought, I'm gonna make this into a movie.
I was an aspiring filmmaker. I grew up in the north of England and then discovered no one made movies in the north of England. So I moved to London and then discovered no one in London made the kind of movies I loved. So I ended up moving to LA. And the first movie I did when I moved to LA was Mortal Kombat. And I had become really obsessed with it when I played it in arcades in London.
Paul Anderson had a tremendously great manager who kept calling me and saying, you gotta see this guy's film, you gotta see this guy's film. And I thought, this guy's done some small British art film, there's no way. But in Paul's small British art film, there was one 3-minute fight scene. And I liked the energy of the fight scene. It's always a cultural clash with the video game company and the movie people. Again, because the video game people are used to not having to make story decisions. Left, right, center, fine. It's what, remember, you, the audience, want. The movie, you have to make decisions for the characters. So they were incredibly involved, but it was always a little bit of that, you know, odd two cultures meshing scenario. It always is. It still is with any video game company, any movie company.
The first thing I remember was thinking, well, how are these guys gonna change what we produced?
The question in Mortal Kombat was what to do with the finishing moves. Because they were extraordinarily violent. It would have made the movie rated R, which would have negated a lot of kids from seeing it. And it would have made you lack empathy with the main characters. If Johnny Cage ripped people's spines out in a movie, which is more real than a video game, you wouldn't have liked him.
I think they ended up being PG, right? Weren't the Mortal Kombat movies PG? You can't make a Mortal Kombat movie and have it be accurate unless it's like NC-17, and then it's going to play in art houses, and who's going to go see Mortal Kombat 2 at an art house? Me. I probably would, but.
Well, the most difficult thing in the movie was actually Goro.
Good old Goro, the last great physical animatronic character, didn't work quite as well as we wanted to, so we had to cut down some of the lines of Goro.
The producers had committed to him before I became involved in the movie. So they're already building him. And, you know, ultimately, I don't know whether I would have gone in that direction. You know, we built Goro. It was a man in a suit who then on his shoulders wore big animatronic torso with another 2 arms. And of course, he just broke down all the time. Goro became like the biggest diva on set. We were always waiting for Goro.
So we go and we decide we're going to show Neil Nicastro the movie before it comes out. So we bring some bad copy of the movie to Neil. We show it to him. He looks at me and goes, based out of 10, maybe a 3. So he just hated the movie.
And I remember thinking when they did the first trailer and they used that music, and they basically just showed these characters. It's not terribly imaginative. I was a little disappointed, to be honest. And then I saw it play in cinemas, and I was sitting in the cinema, and there's a couple of Mortal Kombat fans, obviously, in front of me. And they loved it. They loved it. And what they loved was that you could see they were making a mental checklist. Scorpion, tick. Sub-Zero, tick. Raiden, tick. And, you know, they actually said that to one another. It's like, oh, they're all there.
So now it comes the most nerve-wracking time in the life of a movie producer or director. The movie's essentially done, and now you're waiting for it to be released.
Mortal Kombat as a video game is already a $2 billion with a B dollar business. The take is going up this weekend with the debut of the feature film based on the game, starring Christopher Lambert as Raiden.
New Line calls me up and says, I've never seen numbers like this. We're breaking records all over the world. And you go, oh, thank goodness. And then you have a great weekend.
I mean, he was a very smart producer. I mean, this guy got Mortal Kombat, you know, and set it up as a movie when a lot of people, I think, were doubting whether it was a good idea to adapt video games or not.
Did Neil ever own up to his prediction to me that I was crazy and it would be an utter failure? I don't think he did. I think he probably owes me that.
We had a very entrepreneurial compensation structure, so that if you were running a team and that game became very successful, you were going to make a lot of money. These guys were walking away with $1 million checks, plus.
They had a limit of how much bonus money they would ever pay you over one title. I think it was $2 million. And as Neon explained it, it's like, well, I'm not going to pay you any more than $2 million because the moment I do, you don't need to come into work anymore. And I want you to carry on making games for us.
Each team was really competitive. Ed Boon and I were kind of at the top of the competition scale. I don't know if this is true or not, but Ken Fedesna actually told me that when it came time to negotiate contracts, Ed wanted to make sure he had a salary that was $1 higher than my salary.
We were talking about the compensation structure and how some may view that as creating a bad atmosphere where you're pitting teams against each other. And I could understand and appreciate that some people think that that's destructive. But I think that those are the same, thoughts that think that communist consciousness works, that we have a desire to work hard for the benefit of our, fellow man. I think that's bullshit.
Everybody, every designer, every developer on the Williams, and I'm still to this day, I think of them as the Williams side, went out of their way to make us feel welcome, but in a way that was very different from what we were used to at old Bally Midway. I mean, guys like Eugene and Jack Hager and Ed and Mark all would come up to us and say, hey, this is the way it works here. And, glad to have you, and you guys, you're going to do great stuff here, but don't go talk to them. They're not doing it right.
And it would just push them. People have that drive. It would just push them to do better, because the people that, just want to help everybody else out, they typically don't have that burning desire to prove something.
If you look at the history of the department, we started out with nothing, and we had to build this whole department and we were nobody, and we were fighting like the Ataris of the world. And there was a point where we were all together, like everybody's like clicking, we're all working with each other. And then, I'll be very honest, success came and screwed the whole thing up.
Some footage came from the Tokyo Game Show.
Ready, go!
And the footage was of Virtua Fighter. And the moment that was seen, everybody looked at each other and went, we need to be doing this. And then they turned, this was when Mortal Kombat 3 was happening. They turned to Ed, and Ed's like, I'm not ready. I'm in the elbow deep in Mortal Kombat 3. I'm not doing this, you know. And so this other team that was making a tank game decided, oh, we're going to make a fighting game.
You know, we were making a fighting game in the company that made Mortal Kombat, and I think that was a huge challenge because I think a lot of people thought War Gods was going to be, you know, Mortal Kombat 4 or whatever, and it was not.
You know, it seemed like thematically they were a little too close to Mortal Kombat.
It was unadulteratedly a rip-off of Mortal Kombat. They used all the exact control mechanisms with the joysticks and the buttons, and it was just, there was no beating around the bush. This was Mortal Kombat, but in 3D.
Nobody has a corner on ideas. You know, it's like, you just kind of ideas come and flow, and we need to do what was great for, you know, best for the department, but it could get very difficult sometimes, so.
People would walk past an office where some of the Mortal Kombat guys were in there. If you were on the War Gods team, they would literally shut the door in your face.
Did we get any help from the MK guys on War Gods? And that answer is 0.
That was ugly.
You know, that's the way, you know, the way management pitted the teams against each other, that kind of, you know, didn't help the situation.
I remember one of the reviews, we all had a good chuckle at this, with the reviews was War Gods, god awful.
Well, we had been working on Cruis'n project for, God, I don't know, maybe, I guess 2.5, maybe almost 3 years. You know, we were running out of money and, you know, kind of over budget and over time.
At the time, Nintendo was touting their Ultra 64.
Project Reality. Leagues beyond any currently available or anticipated hardware, Project Reality will bring to home video players the same types of astounding visual effects seen in movies, like Terminator 2.
You know, they were making a push to show that we've got this incredibly powerful polygon-generating new video game system.
So the Ultra 64 was really vaporware at the time. They didn't have anything. They were a year away. So they came to Neil Nicastro and they came to Williams and said, listen, what do you guys have?
You know, went to Eugene and said, hey, Gene, if I can get you this amount of money, I think it was, give me all your rights to the home side of it. Eugene says, yes, if you get me X, you know, I'll be happy with that. And then we ended up, you know, getting another figure from Nintendo that was like a big multiple of X.
And so we decided, rather than going broke, that we would go back to Midway.
So, and Nintendo was bragging that it was going to be based on the N64 and everything else and stuff like that. Well, of course, showing it at the CES show was not running on N64. It wasn't anywhere near N64.
You know, we kind of had to swallow hard on that one because it was our hardware. It was the hardware that we created in there, and they were labeling it the Nintendo hardware.
Only on Nintendo Ultra 64.
Nintendo system being in the Cruis'n game, somebody in their marketing department made that up after the fact.
When the Nintendo thing came along, it enabled us to come back and really have a longer runway to finish the game. And the advantage that we had by doing that was, I'm not saying that we were doing it in a bubble, but we weren't amongst the Turmells of the world and the Boons of the world and so on that could give us valuable information.
And they were kind of brutal on our game. I mean, the Cruis'n USA, I mean, I remember Fedezna was like, yeah, it's snoozing, you know? It's like, that was his term for it.
I do remember that. But I don't remember who gave it that name. But it had to be one of the other guys. It wasn't me that gave it the name Snoozing.
Here was, you know, the guy that abandoned them and then coming back, you know, and it was a little bit awkward, you know, for a while.
Oh, when that game came in, it was garbage. It was like, it was such garbage, and Eugene knew it too. That's why he came back in. He was wise enough to know he needed, you know, he needed that punch that he would get, like Turmell. I mean, Turmell would sit around that game and just write stuff. You know, I would talk about.
We got that energy, like that negative vibe, like, you know, like, ooh, you know, like, and then we got moving and you know, it was cool. It was really cool to get that frank input, you know, like, what really hurts is the truth, you know.
The common denominator in everything that we did was that we all worked for Eugene, you know, and we all grew up on Eugene's games. Ask Mark Turmell, Eugene fan. Ask Ed. You know, we all worked for Eugene. He was our guy, you know. He was Stan Lee, man.
Cruis'n was, you know, a huge commercial success, but critically, actually, it took a lot of flack, you know, because it was more of a casual players driving game. Actually appealed a lot to girls. In fact, like teenage girls loved the driving mechanic and loved, you know, like free drivers, you know, they're practicing for their license, you know.
The startup cost to going to play fighting games high, right? Like everyone's paying attention and you're having to play with another person. You're probably looking for like a slightly different experience. You might be looking for a machine that's not as crowded so you can go play and kind of be left alone.
You know, we just took all this flack, you know, that we were sellouts and our game sucked and there was no skill. And it's, you know, what's crazy is I look at Cruis'n USA today, and from today's standards, which is, I guess, 20 odd years later, the game actually is horribly difficult. So it's like, you know, if you put it out in an arcade today, people would refuse to play it. It's so hard.
When I interviewed Ed and John about Mortal Kombat 3, we had already spoken a few times before, and I said, you know, you're on your third game, are you tired? And they actually did sound a little bit tired.
To some degree, we've become, you know, like a Mortal Kombat factory in the sense that, you know, we know exactly how to do the backgrounds, we know exactly how to do characters, we know how to do all the throws, you know, the filming. It's just we're just like in an assembly line mode. Right. So in that respect, we're kind of like, you know, you kind of wish that we had a chance to do something completely different.
Apparently, there was at the time a pitch for a Star Wars game, and when we started talking about what that potential Star Wars game could be, on the record, they lit up. They were so happy, and I could tell these guys need their batteries recharged. They needed to shift gears out of Mortal Kombat to keep Mortal Kombat interesting for themselves. And I really believe that that's what the Grid became. The Grid was a 6-player competitive deathmatch game with completely different controls.
And then it had all these sensibilities that kind of came from Smash TV.
Good luck. You'll need it. You've got 2 minutes to get 5 points. Good luck.
It was trying to be this thing that was creating a sport out of this new kind of interface, a new kind of way to play. It had all the makings and the trimmings of what would be a big esport today, but all the way back in the 90s.
We'll get people here that it's like, hey, we're going to be on the grid all night. If anybody is saying we need to be off, let us know, just because we want to just grind out and play for 6 hours of the grid.
The Grid was Ed Boon having fun. He really did, he let it all out. He let himself do something different, and you could see that there's a joy in that game of him being able to shift gears and stretch a different part of his design brain. I always see it as sort of Ed Boon's vacation game that he worked so hard on that it was not a vacation at all.
We only sold 550 grids. It was approximately. There was nothing. Grid earned terribly as a single unit. If you had 4 to 6 units together, the problem there was though, you got to buy 4 cabinets and 4 sets of electronics and everything else. So now, in order to get the earnings, what you're talking about, you had to invest, instead of X, you had to invest 4X.
You know, the operators expected every game that comes out has to earn, you know, so much money per week. There was no way that every game was going to come out and earn, you know, $2 grand a week. It just wasn't going to happen.
All management wanted to do was just, they wanted to stamp up. Basically, if they could have stamped out more Mortal Kombats, you know, like in a row, that's what they would have done.
We went to the well too many times with the same mechanics or not enough innovation.
But it was in the late 90s, I saw the warning signs that things may be getting more difficult in the coin-op area.
The consoles for the home get more sophisticated. The CD-ROM is a hugely important technology, right? And it brings that kind of arcade-style graphics into the home.
I could feel that what we could do as a company on the hardware side wasn't going to be able to approach that what a whole team of engineers could pull off.
Console gaming, really changed how I felt about games because I was able to take my time. I was able to play games without like somebody looking over my shoulder and judging whether I was good or not. I was able to, experiment. I was really happy when consoles came about because then there were games for me too. Whereas in the arcade, there was, if I weren't good at Street Fighter, like the whole sort of experience kind of stopped at a certain level.
I think the other thing that had a huge impact was the internet. So the social aspect of the arcade, where that's where you would go and trash talk your buddy and friend, you could now find ways to do that playing your game, but also via the internet.
In fact, I remember an operator telling me once when the Monica Lewinsky conversation got published on the internet that he saw a decline in his audience. Like, it seems weird, but the internet became like this entertainment factor.
I did not have sexual relations with that woman.
And people stopped going to arcades.
So it was that period of time where, you feel yourself being, you see your future, and your future looks crappy, and you feel somewhat paralyzed to actually make a change. I'd say that's probably the crappiest time.
Neil basically had a meeting and he said, hey, I think the days are numbered for the coin-op business.
So the writing was on the wall. Things started falling apart very quickly, and you had this millions of dollars of overhead in coin-op, and it was decided, okay, we're going to get out of coin-op because there's so much more money theoretically to be made on consumer than there was on coin-op. And that was the end of coin-op. Pinball first, then came Midway, as far as coin-op was concerned.
Games were focused direct to consumer now, Sony, et cetera. And it took all of the arcade mechanics out. It took the ways that we would percentage games, the way that we would bring a player through a game. Certainly, consumer development's a lot more complex and requires, higher structure in a team and more team members. But that did change what Midway was for all those years in the 80s and 90s.
When you look at it sort of in the grand scheme of things, it was fairly short-lived. My career at Midway, spanned, I think, a little bit longer than maybe a decade. And, I experienced the rebirth, and then the death of an industry.
We had this great thing, and it was just kind of like the party was over. It was just like, it's 2 a.m., everybody's got a headache, and we had what a ride we had, but they're closing up the disco, man. And you go home with a headache, and that was it.
There was just nothing like the experience of going into an arcade. It was like a dark cave filled with simulators that were like portals to other realities, like pilot a starship over here, or kill drug dealers over here, or be a NBA champion. Anything, any fantasy that you could have, you could go and put in a quarter and live out that fantasy.
Whenever you think of arcade style, an arcade style product, a fast-paced product, I think that was birthed by a lot of what we were producing.
You cannot plan that coalescing of the talent. It just, the way everybody came together, that made all these games is so ridiculous. Nobody planned that. Nobody wrote on a piece of paper, now I need a Mark Trammell, now I need, an Ed Boon type, now I need a, Eugene Jarvis or whatever.
Remember who's creating these games? A guy from Michigan, a guy from California, a guy from Illinois. And as they're, they went through their life, playing all these different things, they said, their brains are turning. Wouldn't it be interesting if you could do this? Wouldn't it be interesting if you could do that? Then these guys grow up and they come knocking on the door, they get a job working for a company like Midway or Williams, and somebody says to them, okay, what's your idea? Oh, I got this brilliant idea. I want to do this. Okay.
I definitely put in code to have the Pistons score in late periods at a higher rate than the Bulls. And it's just because in that era, it was Pistons versus Bulls.
So you're a defense fan working in Chicago.
Yeah, I was a Piston fan living in Chicago, and I had to, watch the Jordan era unfold, night after night. So I did my little part to make the Pistons better than the Bulls, at least in NBA Jam.
How I first discovered the game actually was when I went to church and I was going across the street and getting some candy, and I ran into this brand new game that showed up called Mortal Kombat. Blew my mind. I saw one person playing and it was just the perfect balance of gore, competitiveness, and a chance for a nerdy little Asian kid to actually be toe-to-toe with all different types of people. I hated going to church. So every Sunday, I would tell my mom I'm going to church. All of a sudden, when I would go, I'd go straight across the street and play this video game literally for 2 hours straight. My mom had no clue, but all of a sudden, she didn't know why I loved church so much.
It was the mid-90s, and I got approached by a PC programmer about doing a possible skate game. I went with him, and we went and pitched a bunch of publishers, and we ended up at Midway. And it was probably the most defeating meeting I've ever had. I don't know. It was just the whole meeting felt contentious. It was almost like we were wasting their time. And they said skateboarding is not even popular. And why would anyone want to play a video game based on skateboarding? I've been to plenty of pitch meetings. I didn't necessarily expect everyone to bid or there was be a bidding war for our game, but at the same time, I didn't expect to be just beat down. I think I needed to go through that, and I think that set me up for what became Tony Hawk's Pro Skater.